So one of the things that we pride ourselves on is in trying to ensure that what we're doing, in fact, we're trying to make sure that we're doing a lot more work in planning, given the extent of the work to be done, so that we can minimize any errors if at all. We've had discussions with the ECHA, and so we can tell you a lot more in terms of what has happened based on this. And so, as you would know, the way we are doing this thing, there's a very systematic way in which we're seeking to go about this thing, because it's a lot of money that is going to be spent, and we don't want to be falling into errors in terms of doing that. So, from the ground up, we in fact out and laying out the plans. And as you know, Sam, the original plan that we were given has changed tremendously in terms of the physical facility for the terminal, for example. We've made several changes there based on the discussions. And it is taking what I would say a Dominica footprint based on a number of the things that have been changed, given the fact that we want to ensure that Dominica's differentiation is also shown in the final product that we bring about when this airport is developed. I don't want to take too much time. I want to pass on to Sam to begin the whole process for us to move that discussion forward.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you're saying, Mr. Badger, that in addition to an update of the plans and the planning and all of that stuff, we do know that the alignment of the runway, which is going to be right behind me here. And I remember the last time I was here, folks didn't like the rendering, so I got a real picture this time. But what you will see though is in the alignment of the runway that there are several properties that have been impacted. Yeah. So what that means is for us to be in a position to give the contractor hand over the site to the contractor, we have to relocate property owners, especially built property owners. So a lot of work has been going on insofar as securing the site, talking to property owners, ensuring that they can choose as to what is their preferred means of compensation. A whole housing development has gone on. You will hear a bit more about that in terms of new houses being built. So those individuals whose houses are in the alignment of the new airport can be relocated to the new location. And then another thing that has been going on, if you're driving in the vicinity of the site, you'll see that there has been clearing of lands going on as well, right? And that is not so much for construction, but insofar as getting a more detailed survey of the site. So initially, when the initial plans were developed, there was a LiDAR survey that was created by flying over and scanning the topography of the area. But once you're moving into construction, you need to get a detailed on-the-ground assessment of the terrain. Additionally, we also need to ensure that the geotech studies that are ongoing, because as you can imagine, although this looks relatively flat by Dominican standards, there's going to be a lot of cutting and filling, right? To create that platform on which the aircraft will land for the runway, the terminal, and the other facilities. So the geotech study that is ongoing, where we plan to do somewhere in the region of over 300 boreholes. And those boreholes, anyone passing on, you'll see rigs digging samples at various points along the runway, is to ensure that the material that the site is on has the bearing capacity for the heavy aircraft coming in. So in addition to testing the bearing, we also want to assess as to which material can be used for fill material. And just to put it in context, I think the last geotech that was done, and when we've looked at it and we've tried to We've leveraged a lot of content on it. I think the last geotech had somewhere in the region of about 30 boreholes and a few trial pits. This one is way more extensive testing and to ensure that the site is ready. Also, I think Mr. Badwell spoke about the environmental impact assessment work that has been going on. We spoke about that the last time. That and from the initial surveys, you identified that there are about what 5 or 6 different waterways. And again, in Dominica, once there is a valley, that becomes a path through which water drains. Huh? So being taking a closer look at those waterways, ensuring that the designs for culverts can be adequate to ensure that water is flows unimpeded. Um, for a project of this magnitude, it's not atypical to have to focus on the management of water and drainage. Actually, I think the Douglas Charles Airport, which is a bit smaller, currently has water running underneath it as well. So it's nothing to be scared about. It's just an engineering challenge that needs to be dealt with. So a lot of these blocking and tackling to ensure that we are ready for the construction phase has been going on, and in parallel, I don't know if Mr. Barrell mentioned it as well, but we've also proactively started the engagement of airlines. Um, we want to ensure that in parallel to the development of the airport, there is route development, aggressive route development activity going on, so that at the end of the construction period, we wouldn't have to wait another 5, 6 years to have direct flights from different target markets. But it's something that we can sequence and have those conversations now, so that once the construction is complete, we can have a nice smooth transition from Douglas Charles into the new airport, operating at a much higher capacity than what Douglas Charles operates at right now.
And we also have the lab, the construction of the lab
Yep.
on the site, because as you know, a lot of work will be done in terms of testing of various things. And that is in fact one of the things being used now that some of the borehole test is being undertaken and the tests are being done right there on the lab. And so that is a good thing for us. We also have the construction of the project office taking place as we speak. So these are, and there are a number of things that is in fact taking place to ensure we can prepare the ground. So once the developer moves in terms of ensuring that the person who is going to construct the airport now have a number of things in place. There is no waiting when they get here. So we're preparing the site to ensure that work can start as soon as the contractor gets on site.
Well, it sounds like you gentlemen, the team is involved in a lot of site work. And as a developer, I can tell people when you're going into the development of a major project, you don't see, a lot of activity right away, but there's a lot that goes on that have to be put in place, and you have to do it correctly in order to be able to, your foundation has to be right for whatever you do. And it seems like you guys have been doing a lot of foundation infrastructure work. But I want to turn over to Kenny because I'm sure he has a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions too. But Kenny, I don't, please have your go.
Guys, thank you for coming on and sharing with us some of the things that are happening. You mentioned Mr. B about the design and updating of the design. What kind of updates have been made, if you can share any of that? And does these updates have to be validated by the regulator, for example, the ECCA?
That's correct. In terms of the designs, we, as you know, the runway that is being built is 2,850 meters long. That is going to be built. And in terms of the positioning of the runway, that too had to be verified. Earlier this year, we brought the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority to Dominica, and also we brought the ICAO aerodrome expert to Dominica, along with a number of other officials from ECA. And again, basically, the information of all of the plans that we talked about were shared with ECHA, and they came to do a site inspection. Uh, they made some comments in relation to making some slight modifications to some of the presentations made. But we are extremely pleased that those were approved in terms of the go-ahead for continuing the process. So clearly, and they indicated very early on that it was one of the few airports from the ground up that was engaging not only the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, but also the International Civil Aviation Organization. Because I think the government of Dominica does not want to wait towards the end and have to make all the changes. What we want is from the ground up, and the Prime Minister was very clear in terms of those instructions, that from the ground up and every step of the way, he wants to work with the regulator to ensure that what we're doing is in fact meeting the international standards and requirements. So that is something that we're keeping very close to our chest, and to make sure that that is done. They came here, they were extremely pleased with the testing from the lab in terms of the results that came from the lab. And so we are standing now on very good and sound footing in terms of the positioning of the runway, and two, in terms of the length of the runway and all of the things in relation to the terminal that they looked at. Like I said, they made some adjustments to some of the things that we had on some of these plans, and those adjustments were minor adjustments. So I dare say that in fact we were very, very pleased with the outcome of that encounter with the regulator. And so we moved in terms of that. I mean, the runway, as we indicated before, the optimal runway layout is to handle 777s or A350s in terms of the type of aircraft, because people would want to know what type of aircraft the runway is being built for. We will be looking at, in terms of the parallel taxiway with rapid exit in the long term, a partial parallel taxiway in the short term. So these are things that have been looked at. We're looking at in terms of the lounges, the retail experience, all of the issues. One of the things that you will see from the original to now the change is the original aircraft passenger experience. That was not in the original plans, but clearly, as you would know, that we are operating not only with just long-range airlines, but we also have regional traffic, which we have to cater for. And so in the plans, there was some evidence that that needed to be modified. And based on the consultations, those areas were modified. So we will now have an area for regional traffic with the smaller second tier, as we call them, and third tier airlines operating within the region. So we're not only thinking of just these long-range type aircrafts, but we are also thinking of the regional traffic. And we're not the only one. We see that Martinique next door is in fact making arrangements and expanding their airport for regional traffic as well. And you've heard the lamenting throughout the region of, with the absence of LIAT, of the need for increased regional traffic for interregional travel. So we're not missing out on this in terms of our development for that airport as well. We looked at a number of aspects in terms of the landside arrangements and the necessary medical facility, fuel farm, even the airport tunnel access. That too, in terms of ensuring that we have access from one side to the other side of the airport. So all of these things, like I said, have been going on in terms of those kind of updates that we require. And yes, these things are happening, and they're happening because we have to ensure that when we hand over to the contractor, those things are pretty clear, and we already have permission from the regulator to move the process forward. Sam?
Okay. One last question before I hand back to Sam. On initially, we saw that there were clearings happening at various locations on the site. But since then, I've noticed, and other people have noticed, that shrubs are growing back. What's happening there?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, I'll let Samuel go.
Yeah. So that is I touched on it briefly in the opening, in that the clearing that's happening right now really is to facilitate the surveys and the geotechnical work. Yeah. So, and we've phased the work in a manner that as we complete negotiations, as we complete acquisition, we can systematically go to different parts of the airport site. The site in totality is over 500 acres of property. The clearing that's going on, as you can appreciate, is over an expansive area. And one of the beautiful things about Dominica is that we're blessed. You clear a patch of land, and one rainfall and everything springs back up again. I mean, even some of the folks on the site are amazed at how easily things grow back in Dominica. But so that is what we've seen, and as you can appreciate, the site is not perfectly level. So from the road you could see a patch area, but from the other, there's work happening at the back. We've had visits from various teams in terms of trying to identify spots on the site for the staging of equipment, staging of material, workshops in support of the construction. So it's the clearing is to get a feel for the site, to facilitate the testing and the geotech, because these rigs you need to drive them to sites, right? So as you clear, you bring them to align with there's a matrix or that has been laid out for where exactly the points on the site that you'd want to do drilling. So what you've seen is clear, test, move, clear, test, move, and a systematic way. And I said that the handover of the site is going to be phased, because as you can imagine, um, the relocation would have to be complete before the demolition of properties and that area takes.
And roughly how far off are you from that?
Well, as we speak, I just spoke to Mr. Lloyd, and he's been actively engaging with property owners insofar as coordinating the move-in process, where folks have been taken to have a look at their new homes, because especially those who opted to have a land and house swap, to come in, have a look, ensure that they're comfortable with the construction and the quality of the construction. So that has been actively going on, and we expect that people to start moving in, if not this week, next week, and that will go over a period of time to the new Joe Burton site, which we can talk a little bit more of. But the clearing that's going on right now is really one of facilitating the testing and the site surveys that are ongoing.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Sam, you want to
Yeah.
go ahead?
I want to ask a question, because Dominicans are getting a confusing message. And I just want to clarify, who did the design of this airport? What's the company and where are they from?
Right. So the master plan and the designs that are being done were done by Landrum and Brown, which
Okay,
is an American based specialty firm.
you use base, and that's what I want to get to, because I don't know if it's deliberate disinformation or people who are honestly just caught up in confusion, because there's a suggestion out there that somehow this is a Chinese military base that's being built. And I hate to even repeat nonsense like this, but sometimes you just don't know. There may be honest people out there that earnestly hear these things. And if we don't answer to them, then they may just assume that, there is some merit in that. So I don't know of any Chinese military bases that's designed by American architect. I don't know. Maybe this is the first one.
Yeah.
So we will dispel this as just utter nonsense, and we'll move on from there, right? But I've got some more. I just want to clarify this, because people, you never know. I mean, I travel all the time, and I hear some questions, and I want to you know, when we live in Dominica and maybe we're in the mix and in the room, like you gentlemen are, you're not maybe privy to all of this craziness, but there are some crazy ideas going around. Let's be honest about this. So I want to get to some timelines though, because that's another thing that I keep hearing about. And there's been not major delays, I don't think, but some modest delays. Give me some timeline. Give the audience some kind of timeline. When can they expect to see those excavators and tractorators and bulldozers clearing this runway? When will this happen?
Yeah, so we're at the tail end of our concept design phase.
Mm,
The contractor should be announced shortly.
mm,
There's a pre-mobilization that's going on right now.
mm,
So we fully anticipate that. And the mobilization, Sam, as you would appreciate, that would entail everything from securing the site, developing your workshops and your campsite and all of that stuff, and your batching plant and asphalt plant. So we do anticipate that once those preparatory works are complete, coming into the end of the summer, going into the fall period of 2022, that you'll start to see some heavy earthworks commencing. Now, keep in mind though that due to the terrain, and I know people are get excited about the cut and fill aspect of it, but due to the terrain that we have, there is going to be a period where some basic civil works would have to commence. So by civil works, I mean your waterways. You need to be able to secure and design, build your culverts, because you're not just going to backfill into an open river, right? You need to ensure that the waterways have been secured before your backfilling in that area commences. So
Let me
some of that,
let me put a pin in that because I'm a property developer and I just want to reiterate that because the layperson doesn't really understand that. They want to see construction and want to see things get done. But water is your number one enemy in a development. Period. And if you do not properly ensure that you do a good hydrology plan for the flow of the water, you're going to get problems from the time you start construction, and you're going to end up with a pretty airport that's going to be vulnerable to flooding. And we know in Dominica, we are susceptible to heavy waters.
yep,
So the infrastructure of the water work has to be done. It has to be done properly. And even if it takes time, that needs to be done properly before we can get into really filling things, because then
right.
it does get washed away. It'll become a colossal disaster. So I want Dominicans at home and abroad to understand the term hydrology. You know, trust me, anytime you do a development, your water flow is the most important thing that you have to take care of. And it's good to hear that you say that that's a priority, that this is something, and it will take some time to properly design. Of course, some of it you're going to do while you're doing the construction, but you got to get started on the water flow first. So thank you
Yeah,
for.
yeah, and actually, I mean that is the one areas that we spent a lot of time on, because Dominica, the 365 rivers, they come from somewhere,
Mhm.
right? Because our rainfall and our terrain is such that it channels a lot of water, and we have in this site, as I said earlier, about 5 or 6 different
Okay,
waterways.
Sam, I'm afraid we've lost your audio there. Maybe Mr. Benoit Mr. Badwell, can you fill in or?
Oh yeah. What I'm saying is that in terms of that particular area, you know that area receives a very high level of rainfall annually. And so, in terms of even from coming out of the AIA and all of the other aspects in terms of the studies that were done there, that basically we need to ensure that we ensure that the waterways are well constructed, well protected in terms of the things that needs to be done. And as you said, Sam, quite rightly, that you don't want to do these things while afterwards. You want to make sure that you plan for it. And not only that, we have to plan for storm-like type situations. We've had, for example, Erica in the past, which has indicated, shown to us the kind of damage that can be done with water, and we would not want to build a new facility without taking some of the historical aspects of what happened within that area to bring to bear on this airport. So all of these things are going in, and that's why we're saying that we're taking some time in relation to the planning aspects to make sure that once work starts, then all of these factors have been put in to the construction phase within that project.
Okay, I heard Sam in reference to the timeline, he was basically saying third quarter to the fourth quarter. But I've been in the aviation business, and I know everything takes a little more time in aviation. It has to be done that way because safety is so important. So I think to temper down expectations, we can probably tell the public that by the start of the year they will see significant activity. Would that be reasonable? We want to temper down expectations.
That'd be reasonable, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and I not to flog a dead horse, but the water management issue is a big one. Not only for the runoff that obtains currently, but even once the platform is complete, that is a huge catchment area that we're going to be creating. That is perfectly well, not perfectly, but almost level. So managing that surface water, and Mr. B can tell you, we've had extensive conversations about wet runways and how do we minimize wet runways, and where does that water run off to, right? And being able to channel that in a way that it doesn't cause pooling on the runway, because that is one of the things we can talk to is of significant concern insofar as aircraft landing and taking off. So in addition to waterways,
we're learning from what's happening now at our airport in terms of the interactions that we are having with American Airlines, for example, in terms of some of these their current challenges. And what we're doing is learning from some of these things and having it impact on what is the future development that is going on. So there's a number of lessons learned now that we are in fact transferring to make sure that those mistakes are not done within the new facility. So that area, like I said, is very heavy in terms of rainfall. It can record over 400 inches of rainfall in an annual year, and that too is of concern to us, and we are making sure that we can plan for this.
I'm glad you mentioned the American airline flight. Kenny, I'll let you get. I hope I'm not. I'm moving the conversation a little, but Kenny, if you want to continue on that path, you can.
No, I just wanted to ask. What I was going to ask is pretty. I guess you could say it's major or minor depending on how you position it. But I was going to ask about it's something that has been said before, but again, sometimes there's misconceptions in the general public, in the public domain, and sometimes you have to repeat things over and over again. I don't know which one of you wants to take it up, but can you explain the relationship in the role of the developer and the role of the soon-to-be named contractor, and how they fit within the scheme of the development of the airport?
Yeah, so the developer really is the one who has overall coordination of the development, right? The contractor works for the developer, and then the developer is on point for the risk exposure as well as because government is not taking on the risk. Once that contract is signed between the contractor and the developer, someone has to guarantee that the project goes on and funds are available, and once the contractor mobilizes all that equipment, all right, that they are not landing in Dominica and then we say, sorry guys, we've changed our minds. So the developer is the one that bears that exposure. And then from a government standpoint, it's what we call the guardian of the guards, or the checking of the checks. So the developer is on point for ensuring the quality delivery. From an oversight perspective, IADC is checking to ensure that the designs, the tests, the quality assurance, if you will, is within the expectations of Government of Dominica, which is the ultimate client. So that is really it's not a novel approach. It's something that obtains elsewhere, but it minimizes the exposure from the government, as well as in terms of ensuring multiple layers of oversight are in place to almost guarantee the quality of the final product. So that is why there are so many layers intertwined in terms of the delivery of a project of this size.
Okay, Sam, I'll let you take your segue.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify this, again, further clarify with respect to the developer, the contractor, the airport development company, Sam, which you manage, and the government. And the developer, you say developer, but it's MMC, is that correct?
Correct.
So MMC is the person that the government signed an agreement with to develop the airport. And part of that mandate is they have to go out and raise the funds. So there is huge investment and huge risk that they have to take up. It's an awesome responsibility that you have to go out and raise funds and you have to get this done. Certainly, that developer, as most developers, would hire a prime contractor, a general contractor, which I think we will learn about in the not too distant future. And that is the prime contractor that's responsible for the overall construction. That prime contractor has to have a lot of capacity. And when we say capacity, they have to be able to build this thing. They have to have the technical, they have to have financial resources to meet the cash flow needs between when they do the construction and when they can be paid by the developer. So there's a lot of risk all of these guys are paying. And then that contractor is then going to hire other subcontractors, including, I guess, Dominican truckers, including local contractors, including whatever they need to get this job done. And then you, Sam, are the government's sort of guard dog, if you may.
Oversight body.
Call your guard dog, but you are a guard
I've been
dog.
called worse, Sam.
You've been called worse. Okay, then you should be happy for that. So the development company is the guard dog that the government has appointed to oversee, to make sure this thing gets done right. Because you only have one chance to do it right, and you've got to intervene between these parties and make sure, in the government's interest and the people's interest, that it gets done right. Is that a proper characterization? I just want clarity.
Absolutely. And IADC as an entity has within its mandate the engagement of very specific expertise, right, to ensure that the oversight function can happen. So in terms of being in having lab oversight capabilities, that's something we've been looking at to ensure that we have, from not necessarily a quality control standpoint, but a quality assurance standpoint, right?
And this project is being developed under the Citizenship by Investment program. Kenny, I think you and I will need to go back to that well in the not too distant future, because, you know, we keep getting this attack on the CBI program and all kind of mischaracterizations, and sometimes we need to bring these things into focus. It makes a lot of sense if you want to stop and think about it from a government standpoint in the Caribbean that doesn't have a lot of resources to tap on. This is brilliant, really, if you want to think about it. But I think it's been mischaracterized in the media, and all kinds of scandals and negative things have been ascribed and repeated. And unfortunately, many people buy into this, you know, the missing money kind of fantasy thing that goes around. And so I think we need to bring that back into focus. But Mr. Badwell, you touched on the American airline. I'm going to switch over if that's okay, gentlemen. Mr. Badwell touched on the American airline flight. And we really need to have some conversation about that. It would be good because a lot of Dominicans now use that flight. I will raise my hand and say I've been on that flight 6 times since they started. And I'm sure there are other Dominicans that have used that flight more than I have. Unfortunately, as you suggested, Mr. Badwell, it's probably easier to get to Miami than to many other Caribbean islands. And this is true for most Caribbean, for most of the Caribbean, and we need to deal with the regional travel. And guys, we've got a gentleman, Mr. Angal, who is a leading aviation expert. He's based in Barbados, and Kenny and I have invited him to the program to discuss regional aviation and what it would take to really fix this situation, because this is having an adverse impact on the economic development of the Caribbean because our people aren't able to move. But that's another discussion. I'm not going to throw this on you gentlemen. You're here to talk about the airport. But the American Airlines is coming in at our airport, Mr. Badwell, and they've had some days when they've had to cancel their flights. I know that painfully. Many people know that either they were supposed to be on the flight and they had to be rebooked, or it's not totally horrible, but it is concerning. And what's happening with the American airline flight, I know they need a lot of visibility because they're only allowed to come in when they can see very clearly for an extended distance because it's a jet plane they're flying. And we have mountains in front of the landing area, and it's not an ideal situation as such, but it's the best we have. What's happening in there? And if you can speak to the segue, you know, because a lot of investment is still being done in Douglas Charles, and it should be because that's the only thing we have, and to transition that to the new airport. So speak a little on that. Some people are even suggesting we don't really need an international airport because the planes are coming into Douglas Charles. You hear all kinds of things. If you stop, there's nothing you're not going to hear. So speak to that, Mr. B, please.
Okay, as it relates to American Airlines, you know that since the introduction of American Airlines in December of 2021, it has made a landmark transformation in terms of bringing tourists to Dominica. The diving sector will say to you that they have never seen as many divers coming into Dominica as they are seeing now. The hoteliers will say to you that there is, in fact, a transformation taking place with the number of visitors coming to the hotels in relation to the direct flights. We have moved from 2 flights to 3 flights to weekly flights with American Airlines.
Daily flight.
To daily flights, sorry, with American Airlines. And notwithstanding all of this, we've been able to work with them. And as you know, Dominica, we do have some of our challenges, and that is why the government, after reviewing all of these challenges, and over the years have been reviewed by many governments, that the decision was made that Douglas Charles Airport is not the airport for large size aircrafts, jets, for example, operating within that, because we do have restrictions in terms of our visual flight rules, which is what we call VFR. When you're coming into the mountain end, I wouldn't call the numbers, just the mountain end for you. You have to come with a certain level of experience in relation to landing from that end. But that is the preferred end for landing because you're landing into the wind. However, the runway is in fact very short from that end because you have about 4,800 feet of runway space for landing from that area. And there is no visual or navigational aids, for example, to assist you in terms of PAPIs and so on from that end. So it's a lot of visual flying coming into that area. And when we have cloud cover, which is something that we suffer from sometimes depending on the time of day and the weather issues, that sometimes inhibits the visibility of getting into the airport from that end. And that makes it difficult for the pilots, and they probably have to seek an alternate site, airport, before they can then come to Dominica again, given clearance within that particular area. We also have from the sea end, and there have been some challenges in relation to that as well. And they have been making some adjustments. We've been having some discussions with them. But one of the factors that they have brought recently is the question of wet runways, as Sandel indicated. Clearly, Douglas Charles was not built with groove runways, which would help in terms of bringing assisting the aircraft to come to a stop at a much faster rate. There are other aspects that need to be looked at in relation to the approach for coming on the sea end, and that is being looked at by us to prevent or to reduce the number of cancellations that we've received in terms of the flight having to turn around. And so these things are being actively worked upon to prevent some of these things or reduce the issue of cancellations. As you know, we do not control our airspace. Our airspace is controlled along with the French, and they vector planes all the way down to 3,000 feet, and then the airport takes over from about 2,000, 2,500 feet into Douglas Charles. But clearly, cloud cover, and in terms of the cloud base, If it is below 1,500 feet, then that becomes an issue for the aircrafts. You are an aviator yourself in terms of being able to operate aircrafts within things. For aviation, safety is paramount,
Right.
and no one wants to come in and do something and regret after, because there are rules. There are clear rules within aviation, and you can't go beyond those rules because the international standards stipulate what needs to be done. So the pilot, bearing in mind those rules, will make a decision, and on the basis of that decision on safety, he will not bring the plane in if it is not safe to do so. But we are working with them. They have pointed out to us things that can be done. We are also discussing with ECA as well the actions that are going to be taken in that regard. And we are, in fact, have onward discussions going so that as we go down to the winter season, which is in October, November, we can have a lot more navigational aids on the ground to be able to assist them in terms of the assisted decision making. So from that standpoint, we are in fact, like I said earlier, there are lessons learned for us on this existing airport that we will not want to have certain things repeated in building a new one. So groove runways definitely must go into and be factored into the new runway. We are looking at, for example, from a regional basis, and I think you alluded to that. Regional traffic is important for Dominica because we cannot only survive just on American coming. Yes, they're doing about 30% of our traffic now into Dominica.
If you can, we'll go on regional, but I'd like to just reinforce the points that you've made, because you say giving a lot of information.
But what I want to Sam, before you let go,
break it down a little, and then I think Sam want to add, and then we'll go into the regional. But basically, what I understand you to say, and I've been in the aviation business, is to go into Douglas Charles Airport. People, the reason you don't generally want to land from the sea, you don't want wind behind you. That's because you cannot control the aircraft properly if you have a gust of wind behind you. You need wind in your face to take off and to land. And that wind comes from the east.
Right.
So you have to fly around and over those mountains. And that is not, the easiest thing, especially if you have bad weather. And as a result, the FAA, which regulates American airlines, I can tell you, they had to submit a plan of how they're going to approach, and the plan has to be very clear and very specific, that there's a certain amount of cloudiness that is allowed, and once that cloudiness exists, the pilot can't take a chance with you. They're not going to do it. And in aviation, we have a thing that says you're better late than to be known as the late. So we don't want to take chances in aviation. So that American pilot may fly over, and you may think, why don't they land? You may be on the ground and you say, you see the plane up there, why isn't it landing? Well, because that operation specifications that pilot, that Bible that pilot have to follow says that they cannot land in that weather, and that's why they move on. And so I just want to be clear that this is what happens, and as a result, the airplane then would have to go to another airport. Now, if the airport, as Mr. Badwell suggested, had greater capacity, for instance, when you come over the mountain, you are at a certain height. You've got to go down to catch the ground. You're going to miss the front part of the runway. So the length of the runway that's stated, sometimes it's hard to catch the front. Also, what Mr. Badwell suggested is that when you land on that short runway, you need to stop, especially if it was drizzling. If the runway is wet, it's slippery, and the runway wasn't designed with specific grooves to slow down the airplane quickly. So all of these things are factors that come into play with an existing airport that we have inherited. I don't think any of us built that Douglas Charles Airport runway. We all inherited, and we're doing the best we can. So persons out there, if for some reason, I've seen it at the airport in Miami and people getting frustrated, and we understand that. Everyone wants to get to their home or where they're going right away. But you have to be patient, and the airline is doing its best to work with you. So if it's a weather thing, it could be weather in Miami. it could be weather in Dominica, and it could be weather en route. That someone in Dominica may be at the airport and saying, but the airport looked clear. I don't understand why. It's as if there's a conspiracy why American doesn't want to land, which doesn't make any sense, because the airline lose between $40,000 and $50,000, which they don't recover every time they have to turn one of those flights around. That's what they lose. So no airline would want to do that. And so we need the public, I'm calling on the public to be patient and understanding. Mr. Badwell is correct. That American flight is transforming the economy of Dominica, and everyone is going to benefit from that, especially the hoteliers. But whether you're a taxi operator or you work in a restaurant or even the government in taxes, it's something that's tremendously beneficial to us. So, Mr. Badwell, we want to just thank you and Sam on that, and the Ministry of Tourism and whoever, and keep that conversation going with American to make sure that they get everything they need, because, my God, right now they're already holding us up. We don't want anything to happen for them to decide, that Dominica is too small, they're missing too many days with these flights, whatever it is. We need to ensure that we have that relationship and support for American Airlines so they can continue to help transform.
And Sam, we're committed to the process, and we're in active discussion with them. And you see that in terms of if there is a cancellation, there is moves to bring in another flight, and there are a number of days when we've had 2 flights on the ground, 1 hour between. So in terms of catching up on that, but I want to make the emphasis that safety first. And that is not only with the airline but with the airport as well, because we want to make sure that no negative story originates from Dominica in terms of not practicing safety. And there's a lot of emphasis in relation to ensuring that all the safety practices are in fact adhered to at the airport. And we are hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we will be reviewed by an international group on the whole issue of safety at the airport. So there are a number of things that we are getting assistance from to ensure that we can provide a better quality service at the airport. So it is not a question of just cancellation, but there's a lot of things that go into that whole aspect before that is done. But definitely safety first, and we want to ensure that everyone who wishes to enjoy Dominica do so safely.
So, Sam, if I may jump in, there are a couple of points I want to make sure that is absolutely clear on this American Airlines flight as we just discussed. One, all operations at Douglas Charles are being conducted in the utmost of safety, right? So that just want to make sure that don't get lost in the technical and the approaches and whatever it is. All operations are in compliance with the regulations and are being done within those parameters. Second, the operation of that American Airlines flight makes it painfully obvious to everyone the urgent need for the international airport. Yeah, because you'd hear folks talk about, well, the American Airlines flight can land, so we don't really need a new international airport. What we've seen is the operational limitations, and even from a capacity standpoint, Douglas Charles will very quickly be outgrown, right, in terms of what we need and what can be done. And third, the improvement and upgrading of Douglas Charles is a strategic necessity for a smooth transition into the new international airport. Let me repeat that, because I've heard talk on the block on the street that the upgrades to Douglas Charles is a sham or whatever it is, but it is an absolute necessity that for every year that the new airport is under construction, on American Airlines alone, there'll be 365 flights landing in Douglas Charles, right? So we need to ensure that the experience of those passengers and of the airline that is operated into Douglas Charles can only improve, right? Because we want that flight. That flight is actually a case study in what we've been talking about in terms of route development in parallel to airport development. If we can get that flight and more like it to grow and expand in parallel with the development of the new airport, the case for the new airport is that much more. So it's very important that we do everything within our power to increase the operational capacity of Douglas Strat within measure, within reason, right? So that we can accommodate more direct flights with less interruptions or less cancellations or less weather incidents for the next 3 to 4 years that the construction will be taking place, right? So it's
So
not a distraction, it's not a redirection. It is lockstep with the development of the new international airport that we ramp up and we get as many flights coming in. Mr. Badril and myself are attached by the hip. One of the things that we've talked about ad nauseum is there are new processes, new systems, new technologies that we are looking at potentially introducing into the new airport. Can we try and pilot some of these in Douglas shops, right? Because you want, once you go into your operational readiness and you start cranking up into your new airport, you don't want everything to be brand new and a shock to the system, right? You want to have technologies that you have more of, as opposed to technologies that are brand new and everyone's just trying to figure stuff out. So there will be, as the development of the airport proceeds, there will be avenues that we look at in consultation with American Airlines, and we're working close with them. We've been very clear in terms of our need to partner with them and let us know if there are any operational challenges, any opportunities that they see that we can put in place to improve the operations at Douglas Charles. Because, as you've said, Sam, I mean, I've experienced it firsthand with colleagues trying to come in and being impacted by weather challenges. And if the beautiful thing about having a daily flight, you have people who can think of having a 2-day weekend in Dominica or a 3-day weekend in Dominica. You get a cancellation, that is one whole day gone. So that disrupts the ability to enjoy what they've planned, right? So anything we can do to improve, upgrade. We get rave reviews. Mr. Badu will tell you about the tourists and the arrivals that we've been getting on the direct flight, and their feedback on the landscaping, the plans, the overall.
Well, I can attest to that. Our friend from Paradise, my friend from Paradise, thing in Bourne, has done a fantastic job in beautifying that airport. Everybody that comes in is just it looks like Dominica when you land now.
Yeah. So that experience, we don't have to wait 4 or 5 years down the line to have that experience, right? We want to have that experience right now and grow it. So people, the word of mouth, people will go back and talk about Dominica. I mean, we were just ranked #1 destination in the Caribbean by Travel and Leisure magazine, right? These things don't just happen. There are different building blocks that you need to put in place to ensure that there is buzz around the Dominica product, and to ensure that when we sit down and we talk to airlines about what we're doing in terms of the new airport and even the existing airport, we can exploit as much as possible those opportunities.
I can attest to some of the value of the American Airlines flight. I remember having a chat with the owner of a dive shop in Scottshead, well, in Soufriere actually. Sorry, Sam will know them well, and their feedback was that they've not had a chance to breathe since December of last year. You know, so it was very important for that flight to come on board. But I want to ask a couple of questions to go back a little bit to the international airport. One of the things you kind of you spoke about it, but you didn't iron down a timing. I guess it's difficult to do so. But roughly, when is the contractor likely to take over the site? And the reason I ask this is because for the average Dominican who's looking to be able to, like a trucker or someone else who's going to come in at one part of the workflow, that is an important milestone to them. I'm not saying that work isn't going on. We know the Joe Burton stuff is going on, and there's a difference in the Dominicans working in that regard. But for the truckers and for other people who are involved in the earth moving business, you know, as you said, it's going to be the largest cut and fill operation in the history of Dominica.
And
Where
potentially the Eastern Caribbean.
in the Eastern Caribbean?
Wow.
What, how, when likely is that to come to fruition? And the follow on from that as well, because I like to ask questions in bunches to get all them in, is what kind of knowledge transfer is there potentially going to be? This is going to be the first and only time we'll build an international airport. So what kind of knowledge transfer? Because you want to arm people on island with skills that can hold them over to be able to have that on their resume and to have that as part of their experience set to travel with if they need to. So, and then the final one to go with that, if that not to burden you too much, is if you can explain what the transition will be when that time comes of Douglas Charles from the primary airport to what next. So those are my questions.
So I'll let Mr. B start with the back first in terms of the transition from Douglas Charles.
Okay. No, well,
And then
the
we can.
transition from Douglas Charles is that once all of the aspects for certification of the new airport is completed by the regulatory agency, and there is clearance from them for movement to the other airport, then that is a thing that the governor of Dominica will make a decision about. Clearly, as we move on over the years, there are a number of things that have to take place in terms of airspace. We have to now have increased discussions with the French, along with the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority. As a matter of fact, we've just started broaching discussions with the French. We had a meeting with them not too long ago, and we've just started the whole process where we want to engage the French in discussions, because that too is going to become a major part in relation to how we share the airspace in relation to having this new airport. Uh, we will, so there will be a transition period that will take place, and once the go ahead is given, then all of the equipment and everything else that is will become operational. Then Douglas Charles will then be put to use, but for some other aspects, from other productive aspects, which will be a decision of the government of Dominica at that point in time. Um, the issue here would be whatever needs to move over to the new airport will do, but clearly the residue material will remain, and the government of this Dominica will make a decision. Uh, as we go in terms of the whole aspect of the airport development, we're beginning the process of ensuring that, as Samuel indicated earlier, that we begin to introduce some things at this airport so that when it gets to the other airport, we already have things, especially digitalization and some of those things that will be introduced as we go along, trying to form less queues and all of the stuff that will go on. The whole issue is about facilitation and passenger experience. These are some of the things that we're going to ensure that we can work on to ensure that persons can have a smooth transition coming in and going out of Dominica. So there are things that will be worked on at the existing airport to ensure that we can continue to have these flights come in without much disruption, or minimize disruption as possible. And we will transition into things. Now, you mentioned the issue of training and the issue of transfer of knowledge. That too is a major plank on for the government of Dominica through the Ministry of Tourism and the ministry responsible for civil aviation. In that, there will be re-engineering and retraining of persons. There will also be persons who are going out to be trained into new areas, because there will be new areas of responsibility, especially in the area of engineering. For example, you have various facets, electrical, mechanical, and other things. One of the things I pride on in relation to where we are going, so to speak, is that the new airport is going to be a much more sustainable type airport in terms of what we intend than what we have. For example, we would like to see an airport in the future running on pure green technology and electricity in terms of the things that we're going to use at that new airport. So there are going to be changes in terms of these things. And also it means that the support for the personnel, the engineering and other aspects that has to go into it. Those persons have to be trained in regards to that, because we will be seeking to use or eliminate fossil fuel type equipment being used at the airport. And there will be a phasing of that approach to having electronic sort of vehicles, electronic things, even power at the gate, for example, for some of the aircrafts. So rather than have a generator running to power the aircraft whilst it's at the airport, we'll be doing power at the gate, because, as you know, the governor of Dominica is in fact going to roll out over the next couple of years the geothermal energy plant. And so Dominica will be producing 100% green electricity. So these are things that we are beginning to look at, and beginning to look at the capability, the issue of solar energy and all of that. So you will now have to develop all of the technical skills in relation to those things. You were talking about when the contractor comes, and the question of movement of earth movement, the cut and fill aspects. I'm sure that there is a certain component, a certain percentage that the government of Dominica would have negotiated with the developer for the input of local operators, local persons within that project. Because as you quite rightly said, this is a massive undertaking. This is a project that is one of the biggest projects going to be undertaken within the OECS. And it, in fact, clearly will require a number of locals getting involved. And I'm sure that aspect is going to be secured by the government of Dominica to ensure that they retain a lot of local knowledge in relation to assisting persons who will do that. And not only that the airport is going to be built, but the airport has to be maintained over time. So we need to ensure that we have the necessary and requisite expertise to be able to keep the airport functional and the airport going in the manner that we want to. And so, like I said, will be the footprint at the airport. We're looking more and more towards the sustainable goals that the government of Dominica would have established. As you know, we're moving in terms of climate change. The government have certain things that they want to do in terms of targeting 2050 to have zero emissions. And so the airport itself, in terms of, that's why earlier when we were talking about revisiting the plans, it is how we can reduce the use on fossil fuels and all of these other things in terms of the building, the cooling of the building, and zero emissions. All of those aspects made changes, significant changes to the final product that you're going to have at the new airport. So these are the things now that we're looking at. And clearly, persons will be trained from now to the next 3-4 years into new areas of training, which the government is going to target, so that persons who want to go into that aspect of aviation in terms of all the various supporting dynamics for the airport will be trained. So there will be government will give special training to those areas for people wanting to go further. So these are things that not only the jobs that are going to come in terms of earth moving and all of the other aspects, but the specialized jobs that is going to sustain the airport over time is going to happen. And not only that, we're going to be part and parcel of looking at developing things that would be looking at zero emissions. We call ourselves an H Island. And so I think the government in its goal, in its thrust, in terms of achieving those sustainable goals, will also be developing the airport in that light. So I just want to put it in perspective for you in terms of, you know, even the school, the persons that go into the college and all of the persons doing so now, that there are new opportunities that will be created by the construction of this airport, and new jobs, the things that they will be looking at in terms of a vast array of jobs that will come on stream as a result of not only the construction of the airport, but the final product wherein it has to be maintained and operated.
Great. Thanks for the feedback. Sam, you have any other questions?
No. Well, Sam.
Yeah, there's two Sams here. Sorry.
Sam, you're on mute.
Sam, I am.
Raphael, you're still muted.
Sam, you're on mute.
Sam, you're mute. You're muted.
He doesn't realize he's on mute
He's
yet.
on mute, yes.
You're on mute, Sam.
I'm sorry about that. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I was going to follow up, Mr. Badwell, on this issue. Now we've established that the heavy construction is going to start probably around the start of the year, which is what I think, we want to give some wiggle room there, even though you have a more optimistic timeline. So what we say between around the start of the year, and then you're going to have construction for a number of years before the airport will open. Now, when you do construction planning, you have to have your timeline, and I've heard the timelines, and invariably construction comes with delays. And I don't wish to put any wet towel on this very positive discussion and so on, and good thinking. I certainly hope that it's completed in 2 weeks and we can operate planes on that, but you have to be realistic. And so sometimes it takes some time and you have unintended delays, sometimes schedule things, but best case scenario, it will be a number of years before that new airport is going to come on stream. That new airport, I understand, Mr. Badwell, correct me if I'm wrong, and Sam, is going to have, when they vector it in, meaning that when the Leuzé or whoever, the French or whoever then the authority direct that flight to come in, it's going to be able to come in straight into the new airport. Am I correct with that? And it's not going to have to go around.
Very correct. There is no bent approach to this one.
So this one, they will be able to go from sea all the way through, so they don't have to do any mountain wiggling around, right?
No mountain wiggling around.
And what that means is that even if you have bad weather, that you have instruments, you have your glide slope on your field, and you have your instruments that can guide the airplane all the way towards landing. So even when you have cloud ceiling, it's called IFR for instrument landing, yes, versus V for when you have to see the visibility. So the new airport is going to be IFR certified. Is that correct?
That is correct. And you're right on this, because 95% landings is what the estimate is for. So that means that we are in fact catering for landing on both ends of the runway. And the planes will be able, in a number of cases, with the instrument landing, to do that right down to 200 feet or even to zero.
0 feet of visibility. And the fact that the runway will be much longer, it means that even if they have to land from the sea or from the eastern side, you're going to have enough runway to work with, even if you have to, if you choose to land from that. So all around, it's a much better, much more reliable operation. And I'm sure the airlines now will have the confidence, because we're already developing the route and they're seeing the demand. Hopefully we won't have one flight by the time we open. Hopefully we'll have 6, 7 flights coming in with this, the size of this Embraer, so that we can now accommodate the large flights commercially. But my point is,
let me reassure you, Sam, that is one of the things that is on the agenda of the IADC, that of route development. So that is something that is being done active as we speak. We are speaking with other airlines. We are speaking with a number of agencies to try to see how we can increase traffic into Dominica. The fact remains is that we're not relying on just one airline. Right. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket. Absolutely. We're basically, the Ministry of Tourism is working extremely hard to ensure that we can engage a number of persons in the discuss for things. So we are seeking to develop routes. We are identifying all of the areas that we need to bring people from. And so that there is going to be a constant work as we speak to reach out to the airlines, reach out to the travel agencies, because we know that we have hotels under construction. Those hotels, when they come on stream, be 23 or 24, need to ensure that we can spike up demand so that those hotel rooms can be filled. We want to make sure that, notwithstanding the fact that the airport is under construction, we want to be able to create alliances with the airlines so that even second and third tier alliances that they have, we can bring people into Dominica.
Absolutely. So my question is, and I don't know if you're prepared to speak to this. If you're not, I'll certainly understand. Are there specific improvements you can make to improve the ability of the planes to come in consistently between now and when we are able to have instrument landing? Are there specific improvements? You said the runways don't have grooves.
Yeah.
For instance, you can see we plan to put grooves. When you're going to do it, I don't know, because the runways in use every day. But what specifically can you do, or can you do anything at all, or are we just hostage to the situation as it's?
No. We're not resting on our laurels, Sam. We are in fact doing some active work and we're looking at a number of areas. Currently, we are in discussion and we're looking at several areas where we can seek to make improvements. One, in terms of navigational aids, where it better assists the pilots in terms of his decision making. We are looking at the redesign of some of the things, including the charts, to be able to be more precise, because as you know these days, if you have it and it's actually precise, the pilots can actually plot it in.
Right.
And once they plot it into their system, they have guidance systems that assist them. So we want to make sure we can work with them on this. So there's several factors. The grooving aspect, we're looking at, especially if they were to utilize the runway from the sea end, that it increases the ability of the aircraft, notwithstanding that you may have a little higher tailwind. But because of the fact that we could actually look at the latter part of the runway, have it grooved, we wouldn't do the entire runway, but just the latter part. Once it is feasible, that is, in terms of costing and all of that, then you look at to see how we can increase that. So what we want to do is increase the pilot confidence with the coming into the airport, because as you quite rightly pointed out, visual flight rules, they come in and you have to virtually see. There must be good visibility for the pilot. He has to ensure that he can see the whole of the runway, the airport, before he can make that final decision in. But we want to also boost his confidence so that when he comes down there, there's no hydroplanings taking place in terms of pushing the aircraft at a faster rate because of water on the runway. So you want water to move out of the runway. That's what the grooving would do. So there are several things that we're putting in play. And like I said, we're targeting to start some of those things in terms of impacting positively on the airline come the new tourist season, because we know, Sam, that you operate a hotel. We know that the various hoteliers are depending heavily on the tourism traffic. The negative aspect that goes if just one cancellation is too much for us to handle. And so we want to make sure we can lessen that noise and start talking about other things as opposed to dealing with that. We want to create options for the aircraft. So yes, 09 or the mountain end may not be available, but we then say, okay, we can switch to the sea end and the aircraft can come in. And I can tell you, the good news today is that we had a wet runway situation again today, but the aircraft maneuvered to the other side for the sea end and landed, and everybody was happy.
Oh, wow. That's good to hear, because I can tell you last week, just one flight, one American flight had to be redirected and head back to Miami, and 35 of Jungle Bay guests were on that flight. And it was a 3-day experience, and the people decided to change their mind, and you could imagine the loss that we suffered as a business. And so that's one flight. And so we only have one flight a day coming in. And we need to make sure, because it's not just Jungle Bay, it's all the other hotels that exist in Dominica and all the new hotels being built. And a lot of Dominican people, either for business or going out for whatever reason, there's a lot of traffic and it's going to continue to grow. I certainly would hope, Mr. Badwin and Mr. Johnson, to see more than one flight coming in this winter season, because I can tell you right off the bat, one flight isn't going to be enough. As you spoke about the dive groups, we have a lot of dive groups and wellness groups and yoga groups that are booking, and they are dependent on that flight. So I'm sure, as we're doing, a lot of the other people in the tourism sector, we've been, with this COVID thing, we've been having a very difficult go at it for a number of years. maybe we can crawl out of this, but we need to make sure that that flight operates, as consistently as it can. And we're just delighted that the government, did what they've had to do. I don't know all the negotiations. I'm sure you and Sam and the Minister of Tourism and the PM and whoever has been involved, because I know it takes a lot of work. And when the airlines start having to turn around and so on, there's a lot of, from a business standpoint, a lot of things to consider. And I'm sure you guys are doing a lot of work. I just want to encourage you, as someone in tourism from the hotel sector and from other people who rely on the flights, thank you so much, and encourage you to continue to do the tremendous work that you're doing to ensure that that American flight and other flights can come in the not too distant.
I would say to you that we're getting tremendous support from the minister responsible, the Minister of Tourism, tremendous support from the Prime Minister in terms of getting things done, in terms of if there is a problem and getting it resolved. We're getting tremendous support at the existing airport. And also, I can speak on both ends in terms of the new airport development. The Prime Minister is in fact a driver along with the minister in terms of ensuring that they're keeping tabs on making sure things are moving. So I'm in a very good position, I must say, in terms of the kind of support that I'm getting from both the Prime Minister as well as the Minister of Tourism.
Good to hear.
So I want to say to them that we are indeed thankful, and we're trying our utmost to ensure that the existing airport delivers in relation to the passenger activity that we aspire to try to get, as well as we are moving along in terms of the development on the new airport.
Yeah, and just so
happy for the positive news, and I'll turn over to Kenny, and he'll continue.
We're running out of time, so just try and keep your responses as on point as possible.
Yeah, just the last thing I wanted to say, that what we're doing with regards to American Airlines flight and the challenges is being very proactive. We're not waiting for them to come to us with a purse to you're going to pay either upfront or you're going to pay at the back end. So we're very proactive in terms of trying to identify improvement opportunities and address them as soon and as quickly as possible, right? Because ultimately, if you don't invest up front, you're going to have to pay on the back end. And I think it's a lot easier and a lot more beneficial to do it up front than to do it at the back end. So that is something where I think we've been very proactive in looking at all options on the table. And Mr. Badwell has been leading the charge on that to ensure that not only do we sustain it, but we can grow it, which is key, that you've been saying that.
This show is important because you mentioned it earlier. I don't know, I can't remember who mentioned it. There's a certain cynicism about the international airport as a much talked about development activity for the last 50 years and more. My question is, how, apart from this show, which you've been doing, this is your second show where you've come and updated the general public, and I'm sure it's been well received. But apart from this, what other activities are happening to sensitize the public and to sensitize civil society? Because that cynicism at some point is going to switch to, oh, why, it's actually happening. And then in some cases, people who have not catered for success or catered for a positive turn will probably be left behind for certain opportunities that they could have catered for. I'm not saying they will be, but what other activities is the IADC in particular engaged in to try and sensitize the public and be able to listen to what they're saying, but also push back against some of the fake news out there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and there's a whole communication plan surrounding the project, but one of the things I've been very guarded on is to not just talk for talking's sake, because I think, as you've rightly pointed out, we've heard a lot of talk for 50 years. So we want to ensure that when we come to the public, it's about tangible things that are happening and soliciting feedback on very specific areas. So what has been happening and what will be happening and what we plan to do a lot more of. Now that we've put in the building blocks together, is town halls to ensure everyone is aware, identify channels of communication such as yourself, We will be rolling out the detailed plans, which would have, by the time we go out wide with it, would have the benefit of getting input and feedback from very specific stakeholders insofar as the designs, the functional aspects of the airport, so that we're not out in the public designing an airport. I know a lot of people will want to opine on different features and functions, but we want to ensure that once we go out, the request that we're making and the feedback we're collecting is very specific and tangible, and we can take action on it. So at the onset of the project, we've had town hall meetings in Wesley and Woodfordale to collect feedback of key stakeholders, let them know what the plans are, what the layout is, the earthworks, the movement, the road, the traffic control, and we intend to do more of that as the construction ramps up. We also intend to do the road show insofar as sensitizing on the final design layout, the environmental impact assessment work that was done. I know there were some questions about that. So be able to have dialogue on some of the key concerns that have been raised. I know insofar as well, what facilities are being put on the site. Mr. Barwell spoke earlier in terms of improvements and updates that have been made to the initial plans. We can now go back and share with those stakeholders those improvements insofar as our cargo handling facilities, our FBO facilities, maintenance and hangars that have been added to design, and to make sure everyone is fully apprised and aware of all the various components. Now, you raise an interesting point insofar as people getting ready for the opportunity, right? And we've seen it in that we've had some naysayers be openly against the project, but silently getting ready for the works that are coming. So there is when you think of it from a construction and development standpoint, there's going to be opportunity for the community in the construction phase, of which it has already started, right, with the housing. Once you crank up into the earthworks, there are going to be hundreds and thousands of people moving into the Wesley Woodfordale area to get this project going. As you can imagine, they're going to need, wherever there's large construction sites, there is food and drink and entertainment and other things that go along with it, separate from the direct construction support services. So the folks in the area and the folks around will begin to feel what the opportunities are during the construction, and then thinking further ahead where the airport will be up and running and operational. One of the key decisions I think that was taken is that the access to the airport will be through the village of Wesley. So to ensure that everybody can partake in overnight and other support services that the airport would require.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. Our time has run out. It's so interesting that we've lost track of time, but this has been another valuable intervention by both of you to be able to explain what's going on with the international airport and also ongoing operations at Douglas Charles Airport. Hope to see you guys again. Hopefully, the next time we have this show, we could probably even do something of a field exercise and be closer in on the action to get a sight of what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
The Global View on Q, the big station.